Well, okay, so the problem is it started a metronome. Because I was using this to record some music earlier.
Nice.
So I'm hearing a metronome in my ears, which is really off-putting. I'm not enjoying it.
I look forward to
Oh,
all of your entries being done in like a breakbeat rhythm.
This is really... Oh, no. I'll be honest, I don't love this new arc for me.
Top 5,
fuck, man.
The Dark Knight.
Oh, no. Well, how do I turn it off?
I don't know.
Okay. Oh, it's excessively regular.
Oh, this is a shame this isn't going in.
Well, okay. Well, so the best bit about heist scenes is that they're often to a really cool rhythm, and now I've got a 90 BPM metronome for this entire podcast episode. I can't figure out how to turn it off. So, and 2 and 3 and 4 and oh dear.
Hi, my name's Martin. I like
Here
films.
to say, I love a heist movie in a major way. Oh Christ. Should we do a clap? It's going to be a really regular clap this time. It's going to be exceptionally. Oh god. Okay. Fuck, this is horrible.
And a 1 and 2.
Well, shut up, because you're counting different times with beats in my ear, and I don't like it. That's really bad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are we talking about today, Martin?
Today we're talking about our top 5 heist movie scenes. So not just our favourite heist movies, but our favourite scenes from them.
I'm joined by the highly innocuous, the very hidden Mr. Martin Shaw.
And I am joined, as ever, by the sneaky, the stealthy and subtle mouth from the south, Martin Docherty.
We are talking about our top 5 heist sequences or scenes in a film. So these aren't just limited necessarily to one scene, but we're not going to talk about an entire heist that goes over a movie, for example. We're going to talk about a scene or a segment or a sequence from a heist movie that depicts the heist that we think's really, really well done. And rather than trying to sort of spend a couple of minutes encapsulating why we love a whole film and maybe not doing it quite the justice it deserves, what we're going to do instead is we're going to unpack and delve a bit deeper into one specific scene and why we like that in particular.
Yeah. And, however, in order to vindicate myself properly, given my reputation for not liking, for not having perfect judgment for, shall we say, bad films, I thought I'd start this episode with a bit of a unique spin with a dishonourable mention. So we're going to return to the Now You See Me franchise and talk about probably
show favourite.
favourite.
Returning guest star Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk to you about what we think's the nadir of a heist scene, a really awfully put together sequence that's meant to be very classy, very cool in a film, and how that fails, and that'll maybe give you a hint as to what we think is important in a heist scene. So,
yeah, we're going to talk about the card theft sequence from Now You See Me 2.
Can you set up briefly when this happens in the film? I'd say spoilers for Now You See Me 2, but fuck off.
I can't remember exactly where in the film it is, but I know it's after Daniel Radcliffe has kidnapped the Four Horsemen magicians, and he has convinced them to take over, to steal a data chip from a company that he used to run but was taken over by his business partner. And this data chip basically has the capability of hacking into any data server or any piece of IT equipment possible, and it can't be in the hands of someone evil, so it's this big super secret evil MacGuffin that they have to retrieve.
Yes, the summary that I'm seeing on the YouTube clip that I've currently got from the channel We've Got This Covered, which is the Now You See Me 2 hidden card scene, brackets HD, Jesse Eisenberg, Dave Franco, Woody Harrelson, which is currently sitting at 38 million views on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm upset about that.
with 374,000 likes.
That's worse.
Is the description that is: the four horsemen pull off a risky heist and successfully steal the chip they're after in this clip from Now You See Me 2. Where is it they're trying to steal it from?
It's the Macau Science Centre.
The Macau Science Centre. Okay, cool. So we're in the Macau Science Centre. Very, very white, black and white. They've copied the aesthetics of the Mission Impossible heist scene.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about later on in this because I really like that scene. And how it plays out is so they're throwing a card between each other whilst they've got into the Macau Science Centre. And they're trying to get this chip out of it, and they're throwing around this card secretly.
Yes.
And it's going from character to character, right?
Yes.
For what purpose? To what end, Martin Shaw?
I mean, that's the crucial problem with this film. What we are demonstrating here is that this scene has no real continuity or just... They've tried to replicate this style of sleight of hand magic, which is specifically called cardistry. So it's not the sort of deceptive close-up magic. Cardistry is meant to be stylish and have a lot of visual flair, and like it's supposed to be very dramatic, and that's why they're like flinging it around and doing all these weird like tricks with it, and it's sliding up and down jackets and all this sort of stuff. It's meant to look very difficult and very skillful, but the problem with that is it relies so much on audience deception. That's why it works as a stage show, but fundamentally when you try and make it into a film sequence, it's not very entertaining to watch.
The problem is it's just fitting the palm of someone's hand, and now it's so small that it can be picked up on her shoe because it's not been folded, because it's the card's still intact and still bendy. So it's the CG effect of this card has just changed in size. So like you said about the lack of continuity, to be picked up by her shoe that she's then taken off and it returns to the other size. They're using the focal object as a cool effect.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to it really. It's not clever because what we're seeing is a CG object that can change size, ignore all laws of physics as it's flown around corners.
Yeah. Essentially,
like a frisbee.
Essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to rely on us being impressed by the skill level of these magicians, which we're meant to be in awe of them and how they're managing to steal this and get it past everyone so deftly. But the problem with that is this is a maximum security facility where the guards are very dumb, have no peripheral vision, and at several points have exact direct eyeline with where the card is at multiple points in the sequence. Unlike, say, some of the films that we'll just talk about later, the stakes aren't real because it's so obviously a fake MacGuffin that they're trying to steal.
Whereas we're going to see in some of some of this list, some of the shots and the way things are filmed make periods of inaction and just breathing maybe or a sweat droplet incredibly tense. And so we're going to move into them. So
my number 5 pick is Christopher Nolan's 2010 film Inception, which as of, I think, either today or just the other day, last week when we recorded this now, but has just become 10 years old, which is... Wow. Yeah.
That's very aging, is what that is.
I suddenly am painfully aware of being 22.
Yeah.
But, I mean, picking my favourite scene from Inception is very difficult, and it's the same for basically every other entry on this list, because it's a heist movie in the most literal sense. So my list are very much films about a heist and pulling off this one, like the not one last job kind of scenarios, because I don't think that's a very interesting story setup. But Inception, its entire movie is a heist structure, so its entire cast of characters are the different roles that you would play. Also in a movie, like you have sort of director role in Leonardo DiCaprio, but specific to the goal of the film, which is this memory heist by implanting this false memory into this wealthy businessman played by Cillian Murphy. You have that squad of operatives going around. They each work on different levels of memory and dream to achieve the goal, this end goal of pulling off Inception, which is that memory insertion.
Yeah. So and they set up this notion of the Inception, which is like the deepest level of dream diving they can do, isn't it? And like quite early on in the film, and I think it's also, I think, this particular scene you've picked out that we're going to talk about in a second is really helped by how original this idea is. Like this idea of like heist in memories, which is a really fun and sort of kooky way of doing it. It's really interesting sort of notion to it. And so, what is this final level, this final layer of the dream they managed to get to then, Martin?
So the particular sequence occurs about 2/3 through the film.
The snow scene, isn't it?
Yes. So this is the setup. The first time we see the snowy stronghold, which is the inside of it represents Fisher, who is Cillian Murphy. It represents his subconsciousness. It is the vault it contains the vault where they need to plant this memory and have Fisher encounter it. So he then, once they're all awake and they experience the kick that makes them come back to reality, he then has that thought and will denounce his wealthy business father for Ken Watanabe, his rival businessman's character. Yeah. So my scene is the build up to this. So the first time they erupt into this bleak Arctic landscape, which is just full to the brim of military hardware, loads of guards, because as they set up in the film, the brain tries to defend itself more fiercely the closer you get to its core. So as they're getting deeper into its subconsciousness, you see more and more resistance from them.
It's your dream. I need you to draw the security away from the complex, you understand?
Who guys Fisher in?
Not me. If I know the route, everything can be compromised.
I designed the place.
Now, you're with me.
I could do it.
All right. You brief him on the route into the complex. Fisher, you'll be going with him.
All right. What about you?
Keep this live. I'll be listening in the whole time. The windows on that upper floor are big enough for me to cover you from that south tower. You see it?
Yeah. You're not coming in?
In order to find out the truth about your father, you're going to need to break into Browning's mind on your own. Come on, Fisher!
As a way of building a metaphor about like the subconscious resisting itself, it's a brilliant idea because you've had loads and loads of dense mythologizing about what Inception is and how they achieve it for a lot of the film and what the rules are. And I think it plays with those rules very well. So whereas it could be a really confusing concept, I think this massive Arctic compound that's crawling with soldiers and presents a very real threat to the characters, because if they die in the dreams, they die in real life.
Well, in terms of so what you're saying, but with die in dreams, die in real life, but also we're talking about with the Now You See Me Too thing about stakes and how stakes are established, and so these films are doing a similar thing in that they both have their own kind of mythologized, so there's a kind of mythologized set of rules. So we understand that the Now You See Me cast are better at doing magic than most people would be, and are better at sleight of hand and stuff. But then that kind of falls apart when it's abstracted into the insane things they're able to establish in that scene. But throughout this entire film, they're building up to this scene by talking about how time operates differently in the different layers of the dream, and how time operates differently and how gravity affects these different things. And you see what we talked about in our episode about Prestige, about Nolan's ability to really gracefully switch between embedded levels of narration, especially embedded levels of time in narration. He does it flawlessly in Prestige. He draws more attention to it as a device in this film. But then by the time we get to this lowest level of the dream, if I'm not mistaken, time goes slower there.
Yeah, so the lower level they get, the lower they get down, the slower it is. So they have about an hour in this one before they have to get out.
So it's seeing the effects. There's a fight going on to try and retrieve, because they're so far into different people's minds. There are fights going on to try and retrieve and awaken the people in the other parts of the dreams, in the other layers of dreams, and the time frames they play out then coalesce and come into play at different points in the level you're talking about, which is the snow fortress. But also because he's established the conceit that time operates differently and slowly, he's able to give himself quite a lot of leeway with when they come in, and they still feel impactful and they still feel like they cohere to these established set of world rules, if that makes sense. And the internal tension still keeps building up with that. Whereas in something like Now You See Me Too, the conceit is they are good but not literally magic at doing sleight of hand stuff. So when you see the kind of logic breaks in that scene, it kind of draws you out of the film, whereas in this, it draws you deeper and deeper into the actual mythology and lore that it establishes.
Yeah, and I think that, so the main way that sort of interaction occurs in this sequence is it causes this avalanche, which is a brilliant way of playing and establishing stakes, and makes this sequence, I think, my favourite one in terms of establishing what I guess I would call risk management in a heist, with no better phrase to call it. So
Risk management?
Risk management. So, like, setbacks in any heist film are kind of commonplace. So you'll get, like...
that builds tension, yeah.
It builds tension. It's like, oh, this guard shouldn't be on this detail, he should be over there or something. They have things to work around. Whereas this avalanche that is caused by the changes in gravity from the first layer of dreams, as the van crashes into different things in the chase sequence, that immediately sets them off on a alternative path, because they have to first escape this on skis, which then means their entire route into the mind stronghold at the center has to be rerouted.
Yeah.
So Ariadne, who's Ellen Page, has to redesign it or think up an alternative route in that's a bit more direct, so it takes less time, which also then it attracts military attention, both towards if something artificial caused the avalanche, or just because they're having to make their way more frustrated and more rushed, they get more attention. It's just setting off all these ticking clocks that make this scene such an engaging sequence to watch. It's like
the metronome that was playing in my ears earlier in this recording. I managed to turn off by accident. But yeah, I mean, and so also I think what's also really impressive about this in terms of like moment to moment editing of this sequence is we're talking specifically about how the atmosphere and whatever particularly in the snow level. But whilst this is going on, this snow heist, there is also a car chase and a fight scene happening on top of that, and it cuts in between them, never once losing the tension or momentum, and each of them builds very naturally, and it's really that's the thing that I like about Nolan's filmmaking, is he's able to cut between these, like, he never loses any sort of narrative tension by cutting between time frames, and it's really impressive to see that managed so like minutely and so brilliantly in this, particularly in this scene, sort of denouement almost.
Yeah, I just think more so than even, although it's my number 5, more so than any other sequence on this list, I think this one is the one that has the best stakes, because I can't imagine something worse than being trapped in a dream forever, as something of being like killed off both in a dream and in real life, and being trapped in the level of dream limbo that is terrifying.
I agree with you. I think my number one choice in this is my number one choice because of how it plays the stakes and how the film establishes stakes throughout it, in a very different way to this film. But we'll get to that as we. So my number 5 choice is the Langley heist from Mission Impossible, Brian De Palma's 1996 classic. So the one thing I want to bring out in particular, and watching these scenes again for this podcast, really sort of crept into my mind, is how it's integral to all films, but particularly to a heist movie, how integral the notion of audio is. So it's played in with some later entries in this list for me, but how they use sound in this scene in particular is really, really fascinating. So the actual Langley heist, the build-up and the escape from it, is all in all about 18 minutes of the film. It's a really long runtime, but I'm thinking about the kind of latter 9 minutes or so of this heist, which is after he's managed to get into the vault that he's sort of abseiling down.
He's at the vault.
So they have a decibelometer to measure how much sound they're making. There's a certain amount of sound will trip alarms in this thing. They're not the main conceit obviously is they're not allowed to touch the floor, and I think in a lot of people's minds, people remember this scene of Tom Cruise being lowered towards the floor and like being an inch or so. They remember it with the dun 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 theme going down. But in the actual scene in the film, there is no extra diegetic sound. There is no music. It's just silence from what I was watching today. They might play the theme in towards the end, but in the actual the reason this scene is so tense, so intensely tense, I was about to say, which is horrible wording, but is because they draw attention to how much sound they cannot make in the scene. And you have this beautiful theme and incredible score by none other than Danny Elfman throughout the entire film. Mm-hmm. But they choose in the most important scene in the film, one of the most intense scenes in the film, they choose to not use this master composer. And that's because not having sound, because we're so used to having some sort of background audio in films, be it light orchestral music or some of the hip-hop sounds you see in Into the Spider-Verse, we don't have any of it in this scene. And it just you're sitting there just like, please something happen, because it really focuses you. Because in film, obviously, you're working in several different mediums. You're working in sound and visual, and a couple of others, but those are the two main things you focus on. In this scene, when you rob us of any extra background noise, you focus us in exactly what's happening, become very tunneled in on what's happening, and they have some really brilliant things that they consider some of the practicalities of a heist like this that aren't normally maybe considered. There's a lot of this scene. It's focused on the camera zooming in to 2 droplets of sweat moving down Tom Cruise's glasses, and it just zooms in, and you can see him focusing on, and the camera kind of mirrors the intensity of his gaze as he focuses on these sweat droplets, which it felt like good representation to me as someone who wears glasses and gets really sweaty, especially when recording these podcasts. So nothing can touch the floor, not in the slightest drop of sweat, and he sees it and he moves his hand just to catch it. There's the guy trying to get into the room that he's trying to heist, that they keep trying to deny access to, and especially I think the lack of sound in this scene in particular, the lack of extra diegetic sound, really brings into sharp focus what's going on, and the really impressive kind of camera work, and also the stunt work that Tom Cruise is doing. Yeah. As established, he does most of his own stunts. Yeah, and this one in particular, this kind of abseiling thing, it's really impressive to see. It's De Palma working at his absolute finest, especially with in congruence with every other aspect of the film. So that's what I really love about that scene in particular.
And it speaks to just how iconic that scene is. That the first time you said Mission Impossible was on your list, I was like humming the theme song, true, but also it's just in
your mind you have that hymn.
It's the ceiling drop, and it just before he hits the ground, it like halts.
We're going to see a lot in some of these choices we've made. Is how iconic some of these films are. They really alter how heist movies are done since.
Now, from one thing that's very popular to another, my number 4 sequence is the opening from The Dark Knight from 2008.
What a fun coincidence, Martin, because my number 4 slot is also the opening sequence from The Dark Knight in 2008. It's weird how that worked out, isn't it?
3 of a kind. Let's do this.
That's it? 3 guys?
2 guys on the roof. Every guy gets a share. 5 shares is plenty.
6 shares. Don't forget the guy playing the job.
He thinks he can sit it out and still take a slice. I know why they call him the Joker.
So why do they call him the Joker?
I heard he wears makeup.
Makeup?
Yeah, to scare people. You know, war paint.
The Dark Knight, it's gonna make my list seem a bit weird. I think this is probably my least favourite sequence of the 5, but I think it's an essential heist sequence for what it does for character, because obviously The Dark Knight is remembered for the genre-defining performance of Heath Ledger as Batman's archenemy, the Joker. And this sort of 4.5 minute long sequence defines what his role in Christopher Nolan's Batman universe is. Mm-hmm. So you have this sort of menacing, really sort of undertone coming from Hans Zimmer's sort of synthy score. It's not music as such, but it's like it really sets the tone. It's kind of a metronome.
It's more kind of like almost like I mentioned. It's like kind of atmospheric, kind of just. It's a very light kind of atmosphere setting thing. So in contrast to what we just talked about with Mission Impossible, where they don't include background noise, they have this instead.
But otherwise, it's like just ambient sort of urban noise. It's like streetcars passing and stuff. And then you get this shot of a man holding just a generic clown mask by one side, and the clown mask is facing the camera right in the center, and you're like, bam, I know what this is. I've had the Joker teased on a playing card at the end of Batman Begins a couple of years ago. I know who this is. This is going to reveal the Joker. And that is all this scene is for. It's cool. It's a cool heist sequence, but it is entirely to serve the purpose of being like, you're about to watch the greatest villain on a film. There are 6 people in total, one of which at the end is then revealed to be the Joker. But you are being misled every time they introduce a new crook, because they're just a gang, and they do this sort of casing this bank joint. They've clearly had this extensive setup, and for me, one of the most important things for a heist sequence is you get some sense of setup. Clearly, this is a very organized small crew, and then one by one, as each one of the members of the crew performs their role, they start being killed off by the other criminal. And because you're watching it being like, oh, maybe this is just a random crew. So you start thinking maybe this is just like the Joker building up his funds to start his criminal empire and stuff, because you hear them all chatting about rumors, so you're disarmed and being like, oh, this is just a criminal gang. One by one, they're all killed off, reducing the number of stakes. So you're thinking like, this is a bunch of petty criminals, increasing the amount of money that they're about to walk away with from this sequence. And you get sort of a moment of brief resistance as one of the bank tellers comes out and shoots off a shotgun at one of them and tries to injure them and defend the bank. It's he says some throwaway line that's something along the lines of like, do you even know who owns this bank? So it's like the Joker's crew have moved in on like some of the local crime families' money. So it's showing him that he's ruthless, he's uncaring, but calculated. Like, he's organized this heist to earn it. And he's more calculated because he's telling his goons to kill each other off to ensure there's no loose ends, that sort of thing. And it's only at the point by which one of the criminals tries to turn on the other crook. There's only 2 of them left. We've seen the rest of them killed off. Who then reveals himself to be the Joker. But with the line...
I'm betting the Joker told you to kill me as soon as we loaded the cash.
No. I killed the bus driver.
Bus driver? What bus driver?
And at that point, the back end of a bus slams through the bank and, like, kills him. And it's like suddenly you have also playing off against this really deep, dark tension and precision. Just the comedy and the craziness that also mirrors his character.
It's what you were talking about in our Prestige podcast, was about the notion of cinema of misdirection, or film of misdirection, which Nolan employs throughout his career. And in this, it's all about misdirecting you, which is the actual Joker, and it's all again playing on the notion of identity, and it's playing into later the scattershot kind of undefined sort of chaotic nature of the Joker as this anarchistic evildoer. And what I really love about is what you say is the scene with the bus where it comes in. Which is actually cribbed from a film we're going to talk about a bit later on this list. This film takes a lot of cinematic cues from the opening bank heist scene of Heat, and Nolan takes it and sort of reworks it using this kind of misdirection style that he really, really plays with really effectively. I guess it's just in terms of like the aesthetic of establishing a character as well, the particular masks they use, these kind of differentiated clown masks. It's a really nice visual metaphor for the Joker as a severely non-unified mental force, which you see throughout this film, is that he adapts and changes. The stakes for him are always about how is he going to upset and demoralize Batman. And so he's a very fluid, a creature of flux, and you see that with the aesthetics of the masks and these different things being killed off, just for these representations of the Joker being killed off for no reason, for shits and giggles, essentially. And
it works really nicely that throughout those sequences, as you're seeing them being killed off and things go wrong in the sense that it ends up killing one of them as an accident, that all of these duos have also been like, so what have you heard about the Joker? Well, I've heard like XYZ. They're spreading rumours about him. They're spreading misinformation too. So you just don't get an idea of this one unified character. You get you get what it is, which is an idea. You get an imperfect persona, which is precisely what he is. I think it's just they use the aesthetics of a heist movie so well to make this character seem very clever. He holds all the cards. He's a criminal genius, and it works so well before you've even entered. Like you're 5 minutes into your film, and you're already like, oh. And
as you're adding this scene from a heist film essentially as the starting bookend for your superhero movie in order to establish certain character traits of the one villain, and it's very very distinctive, and it's done because this film is not Batman's film, it's the Joker's film, isn't it? He's the driving force of the plot and everything, so it's really effectively done in that sense. So let's move on, I think, to your number 3, Martin Shaw, which is...
So my number 3 is Guy Pearce's only his second film, which is Snatch. Okay. It's a 2000 movie. So he'd already just released Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, which revels in this British approximation of Tarantino sort of underground gang crime. Brilliant film. But I love Snatch because it too exists in this grim world of like hired guns, nasty cockneys, hitmans, nicknames like Brick Top and things and counterfeit goods, bare knuckle illegal boxing and double crossing at any point. So Snatch is this just really grotty underground crime film, and the sequence that begins Snatch is a real sort of harsh smash and grab scene. So it's vastly different to I think every other entry I have on my list, because all of the other ones have this real intricacy to them and have loads of different things juggling around this one. Whereas this
is just pure lo-fi chaos.
Hey, let them through. I go. Mutti, you have kept us waiting for half an hour. Are you trying to give me heartburn? Mutti. Mutti.
They shoot the sequence very well at the start to make these 4 characters who are dressed in disguises as Hasidic Jews to work their way into a diamond inspection and like cutting factory in the back end of a jeweler's. You see a long shot of the 4 of them on these like blue screen security monitors, which is shot purposefully like your point of view watching them. And they're very sort of timid. They're being walked through and checked over by guards and everything else. So you're aware something's clearly going to happen, but you're not sure what. And they move their way through the building. There's security checks at points. There's visual comedy as like the guard pans this little metal detector over his crotch and stuff.
But not only that, even in the actual heist scene itself, when the way the camera flips and moves between cuts, it's very comedic. It's almost like very kind of schlocky, very almost like high school student filmy kind of vibe to it, and it's done purely for that kind of chaotic comedy almost. Yeah,
so you go from this really slow build up. The director of The Office wanders up and just shouts off, being like, "Where have you been? You're so late." And there's just this turn, like on a pin drop. Suddenly,
when the theme comes in.
This roaring sort of heavy guitar riff starts playing. One of them, who's been playing this like obese character, like waddling along behind, is played for laughs, whips off the front of his disguise. He's wearing this Kevlar vest with 4 pistols strapped to it. Each one of them rips one of these pistols off and just starts just smacking people in the face and pistol whipping them, kicking everyone in the office over their desks, whilst the camera sort of whips and turns, sweeps and like spins around anarchically, just trying to keep up with the chaos that's going on. And it's like it's similarly shot to how the action scene in Kingsman, the first Kingsman movie, is shot, and it's constantly disorienting and sweeping around. It's designed to just. It's a brilliant way of showing chaos on film, I think.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the relation to Kingsman Secret Service, because the film was produced or EP'd by Matthew Vaughn, I believe, who is the director of Kingsman Secret Service, and you can see a lot of the similarities coming through it in this. Similar to how you can see in Ocean's 11, the writer, Ted Griffin, he EP'd Wolf of Wall Street, and you can see a lot of the similar kind of techniques and kind of dialogue choices go into that film as well as in Ocean's 11. It's interesting to see that kind of cross where, like, the EPs are very non-defined role. It's a very kind of very vague, very ambiguous one to those who aren't in the film business. But you can sort of see aesthetic choices kind of leak between films where you see these sort of links in production crew, which I find really interesting.
You get this sense of abject fear on one hand from the character who's playing the director of this diamond office, and a sense of utter control and chaos that just permeates the entire rest of the film that you're about to watch. And I think it's a brilliant opening sequence. It's a brilliant representation of just punch and run kind of crime, which apparently is fairly accurate to how these kind of things play out. Because I watched a Vanity Fair article video, which is
about how the two are similar.
How the two are similar in terms of how it plays out versus how in real life it would have played out with a noted jewel thief. And he's like, this works quite well because you would never walk into these back offices where you have to be buzzed in and crucially buzzed out by security without being the person who knows everything that's going to happen once you get in office. It's a really punchy, engaging, and just ultimately quite fun sequence. And it's very distinct and unlike a lot of heist movies, which, barring the greats, I think because the great heist movies have so much influence, you get a lot of imperfect imitators, whereas I don't think you've seen nearly as much replication of this kind of crime. That I think it stands 20 years on still quite a unique sequence and very fun to watch.
It stands really juxtaposed with some of the ones we're about to talk about. So my number 3 choice is Ocean's 11. And it's it couldn't be more different to Snatch in terms of how it's edited together and how the shots are composed. Because Snatch is was much more frenetic, much more grotty, like you said, gritty kind of lo-fi cut of a film. It's Guy Pearce's second film, whereas Ocean's 11 so Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's 11, 2001, which only a year later, is incredibly stylistic. Its edits are really smooth. It's really sort of nicely sort of flows between each scene, and this particular scene that I've chosen here is an example of how those editing choices and the structural edits kind of really work nicely together in this film. It's not the actual heist scene, it's a practice for the heist scene. So my favourite part of Ocean's 11, which is one we're going to talk about later on as well, is when is established earlier on in the film that they need to replicate the bank vault for some reason. They don't tell us exactly why. They need to replicate exactly his bank vault. So they steal various things in order to replicate it and to make it perfectly. And they have done. And so what they're doing is Brad Pitt is describing how the heist is going to operate.
7:30. Yen gets locked in and we're committed. Once the electricity goes, all access points to the vault and its elevator will automatically shut down for 2 minutes. That's when we make our move. Okay. They put you in the middle of the room, 10 feet from everything. You have to get from there to the door without touching the floor. What do you do?
10 says he shorts it. 20.
Ocean's 11 is a really effective pastiche of heist films. So using its really slick, witty edits, and particularly its dialogue written by Ted Griffin, which I think is of particular note in this film. It's all very punchy, it's all very fluid. It does these things in order to put together almost like this intensified, exaggerated version of a heist film. It's this notion of Jean-Jacques Bulliard's notion of hyper-reality in the simulacrum. So it's where we have this constructed collective idea of a thing that supersedes what the actual thing is like. And he does this, so the heist movie itself does this to the notion of a heist, which is, as the jewel thief example from Snatch, which you were talking about earlier, they're much more kind of like smash and grab jobs. They're not as intensely plotted out as these are. But Ocean's 11 turns it up to 11, ironically, with the kind of how camp and kitsch and how over-exaggerated each element is. And I really, really enjoy that. And this scene I'm talking about in particular is when they're showing the amazing Yen do these things, and it's cut as if a very common trope of heist films is where someone describes what's happening in the heist, and what you see on screen is actually the heist happening, right? The very, very common trope where you see a description of the heist and what you see is the events of the actual heist play out. And so Brad Pitt is describing exactly how the amazing Yen is going to do all these things, and you see it replicated perfectly. And then you see him walk across the set, and you're like, is this a weird transition? What's happening here? And then it cuts a bit further back, and you're like, oh, this is the replication they've made, and they're actually practicing it. And so it's this really almost a little visual gag of editing where they show him, where they play on your expectations of them narrating a heist scene, it's showing it going off perfectly, which is what you're seeing there, but it's just him practicing it in their practice vault they've made. I really enjoyed how witty that was. It's not as intense maybe as the actual heist later on that we're going to talk about, but I thought that in particular really stood out for me as a pastiche of a heist scene, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, just in terms of it reflects so well on the rest of 2001's Ocean 11.
Yeah.
That so many moments can be picked out as just highlighting like the entire thrust of the film, which is we're going to send up heist movies and also make it a really cool and engaging watch at the same time as making fun of it. That it's just so many sequences pull out like that.
So that's what I think is really I like with this film, is that I like to pick out particular very small edits. So that moment where Brad Pitt walks in front of what you imagine is meant to be the heist playing out in real time as the trope would establish. It's actually, no, it's a planning and there's still more to do. And Brad Pitt walks and interrupts that and draws you, completely reorients what you think's happening in the film. And it's just exceptionally well done. I love that moment in particular. Which moves us on to your number two.
I noticed as I was making this list, when I was reflecting on it, I've picked a lot of bank robberies because they're plentiful in the genre. It's the simplest one to set up an engaging sequence about. You've got loads of different variables to play with in terms of guards, extra police support. You've got tense shootouts you can have outside a bank, hostage situations. There's all sorts of things you could pick up. But the thing is, no other film comes close for me to replicating the palpable tension in the iconic bank break-in in the 1995 film Heat.
Keep! Stay down. We want to hurt no one. We're here for the bank's money, not your money. Your money is insured by the federal government. You're not going to lose a dime. Think of your families. Don't risk your life. Don't try and be a hero. Right now, I want you to sit on the floor and put your hands on your head. Anybody feel sick? Anybody got heart trouble? Go ahead and lean against the wall. Give me the key. What key? Get out! And stay down! Sit there, don't move.
De Niro commanding this room, explaining the rules of engagement for the people who are hostages in this bank as they take over. Just explaining in this domineering voice of just, we are not stealing anything from you. You will not lose anything. It's insured.
He's very, very clear about this kind of stuff, and he's very authoritative, and that's in a way only De Niro can be.
Yeah, it controls not only the sense in that room, but for me, seeing that in a cinema must have been just incredibly engaging because it's so powerful. He's got such gravitas in this role as criminal. I was going to say criminal genius. I don't even know that it's criminal genius because he's just wandering in, brandishing a shotgun and being like, I don't want to have to get violent, but I will. And
it's less criminal genius. It's more pure force of charisma that this man commands, and he does so. And I think also in terms of performances, it shows it's the main contrast he has with Al. Because I think in this film, Al Pacino puts in almost like a hyped up, almost like a Nicolas Cage and say The Rock almost performance. This is the way he delivers some of his lines and stuff. So he's very kind of a much larger than life kind of character in those sort of ways. But Robert De Niro is always very calm, collected, but always sort of had his very charismatic, powerful aura. That makes sense.
And I think, like how I mentioned briefly, the score for The Dark Knight has this groaning sort of background synth tension to it. I believe the score for Heat was done by Elliot Goldenthal.
You are exactly correct, yes.
The background for Heat is just this very regular drum beat and sort of... It's not intrusive, but it gives this scene almost like a heartbeat sort of sense of tension that just plays out and makes everything feel so urgent and so precise and so engaging, whilst you cross-cut between crowds of people in this one bank being terrified of the gang, and then them running in and breaking out with bags full of money and then just legging it with these like 70-pound bags of cash. I think it's just, there's real beauty and simplicity for me here. I think it's just, it doesn't need to do anything else because the performances and what they've filmed are all you need to make this scene as interesting as it is.
So I agree with you in that the performances and the shooting is almost all you need, and the sort of the camera shots is all you need for this scene to work. But so you're right in that they come out of the bank and it's incredibly tense. When they've just discovered where they're going to be, Al Pacino's sprinting, moving with his squad so they can. The team led by De Niro is leaving the bank, not knowing that the police are onto them, and then a truck passes and Val Kilmer notices two cops pointing a gun at their getaway car, and Val Kilmer opens fire, and that's when the gunshots start happening. So you're talking about this backbeat, this very heartbeat of the scene, which then is punctuated and blown to pieces by the ungodly loud gunshots in this film. So the sound in Heat is really interesting. So there's a lot of theories as to why it's so. The dialogue's very muted and quite quiet at various points, and the sound of the gunshots are inextricably loud. Like it can almost make it difficult for home viewing because you're having to kind of adjust the volume every so often. But there's different theories about some think that Michael Mann's just going deaf, so can't mix a film properly. There's also an idea that he has this very high-tech like earpiece that he has in when he's directing, so that he can kind of mix the levels almost in real time. The reason the gunshots in this film are so exceptionally loud is because they don't ADR in sound effects like most films do. They captured the live sounds of blanks being fired from these guns as the film is shot. So they happen in real time, mixed in with the actual. So they're not overlaid and they're not mixed separately. That is how loud those guns sounded on the day, because they're filmed because they're recorded with the boom mic, and the blanks being fired. So these blanks being fired from the guns are not effects added after necessarily. Apart from some of the machine guns, they added some visual effects for the gunfire. And so this is what I think makes this. So you're talking about how palpably tense it is, and then it goes to complete hell of these incredibly loud gunshots, and they're not like, it's not gunshots constantly all the time. There'll be these bursts of gunshots, moments of complete silence. This little drum beat you're talking about, this little dun dun dun, and then again it's this huge explosion, this cacophony of noise, and then it's again people running, people moving, then they stop, take cover, and it fires, and it's chaotic and it's brilliant, and this ear-piercing sound of gunfire ricochets through, and it powers through the film, which is also. You're talking about, imagine seeing this in cinema for the first time, right? So imagine seeing De Niro and Pacino for the first time in a scene together, but also, when this film was released, Dolby had just changed how their surround systems worked in cinemas in 1995. They had a change, their name changed. They also released a new kind of technology in their sort of in the surround sound cinema. So with coinciding with a change in how surround sound systems worked in cinema, alongside the incredibly loud and punctuating sounds of these gunshots, you had not heard anything like it before in a cinema, like without a shadow of doubt. And so that's what we were talking about sound earlier. And it's what I think is one of the really interesting things about Heat, is that I will admit it makes it more difficult for you. When I rewatched it the other day, you do have to adjust the sound every so often because it's not as effective on home TV systems. But with proper surround sound and stuff, it's absolutely mind-bogglingly well put together. It was remarkably impactful how loud these scenes are. It's imagine watching that in cinema the first time would be incredible.
And it just goes hand in hand, that sound, like the force of that sound just goes hand in hand with how tight and controlled and very insular, because so many of the shots they're obviously close framing because they're interior shots, but they're so framed around individual people that give this real sense of claustrophobia and stuff. It just gives it so much raw force.
Mann has had a very distinct visual influence on how, not just heist scenes, but how these kind of action films are shot in various points, like these kind of more considered action films. He's had this, and the shots in general, and then when you're right, they have these really claustrophobic inside shots, and then in this scene, they mix them with like these really big, wide spanning shots of De Niro and Kilmer running for their lives. One thing I also think is interesting about this particular scene is it's one of the instances you start to see De Niro's underlying philosophy of the film fall apart. So De Niro says earlier on in the film, you have to be ready at any moment to pick up everything and leave when the heat's 30 seconds around the corner. And that's where the name of the film comes from, Heat. You know, so if the police are 30 seconds behind you, you've got to be ready in 30 seconds to go pick up whatever you have. But in this scene, Val Kilmer gets shot so that he can't move. He gets shot in I think it's the leg he gets shot in.
Yeah.
And De Niro doesn't leave him. De Niro picks him up, and De Niro moves on. And so you're starting to see this kind of objectivist, individualist philosophy of De Niro's character in this film fall apart when introduced to real-life empathy and sympathy. He does not want to leave this man behind, even though he's, throughout the entire film, he's very adamant about the notion of leaving, dropping everything at the top of the hat. And you start to see this unravelling, and then in the denouement of the film, the reason De Niro gets caught in the end is because he spends time going back to kill Waingro, who made a mess of his job at the very start of the film and started going around murdering people. He goes back to seek revenge on Waingro, this character. And it's a contradiction of his internal philosophy that drives a lot of the plot of this film. And you're seeing, again, this internal philosophy fall apart at this moment, with him going back for Val Kilmer and picking him up and moving him. And you see that he's not this kind of composed character he kind of makes himself out to be.
I don't have any closing remarks, just Heat's bloody good.
Well, that's fine, because Heat's bloody good. It goes into my number 2 slot, which is Heat, directed by Michael Mann, released in 1995, directed Scott 1996. I'll coincide with Dolby Sound, because my scene that I've chosen is the opening armoured car heist.
Just crossed over the number 1 lane, 300 yards from you now.
Get set.
I am.
Here we go.
So Kilmer takes up it's like a big delivery truck, I think he gets in, and then De Niro gets into an early responder ambulance. He steals that from a hospital, and they all converge together onto this armoured car. And the armoured car is kept in stasis by another member of the heist team driving in front of him and sort of liberating and then moving on, which keeps the armoured car in a position. And the film's been very quiet, very muted until this point. And then Val Kilmer drives a truck into it, and everything explodes into pure noise, cacophony, and chaos. And again, it's the sound editing we talked about earlier in the previous scene. And they come and they pull these people out of these the van, and they're not trying to steal bullion or gold or banknotes. They're trying to steal dealers' bonds, or buyers' bonds, I think they're called, to sell back to a corporation. It's a very archaic thing in American currency where these bonds have a certain amount of money prescribed to them, and the physical ownership of it is what entitles you to it. So it's a really weird old system, but a lot of corporations use it when they're trying to do deals that aren't necessarily totally cool with everyone involved. So that's what these are used for normally. And so it's a very unique thing to be stealing. And they crash into this armoured car, and then De Niro commands again these people as they come out of the car, you will not be hurt if you comply, because they're all wearing their masks. And the influence in what we talked about earlier with the Joker scene in The Dark Knight is they're all wearing these masks, and that is a direct visual influence from Michael Mann's opening scene here, I think, with the very creepy mask they all wear when they do it all, until one of the members of the heist loses his temper, and says, asks the guy why he's listening. Val Kilmer says, because his ears are blown out, you idiot, and there's blood coming down his ears. This guy, this crazy guy Waingro, who comes to be one of the recurring antagonists of the film, can't quite cope with it, or is too bloodthirsty or whatever, shoots him in the head. And then they have to murder all the other people in the armoured car, and it shows how the stakes are very real for the people doing the heist as well. They don't, because they know the minute they murder someone, that turns into an entirely different crime, and they're an entirely different kind of criminal, and that's not the kind they're aiming to be. And you see it again in the scene that you picked for yours, in that De Niro doesn't want to shoot anyone in the bank. He was like, we're not going to shoot you, we're not here to kill you, we're not here to hurt your money, we're here for these and these reasons. And it is, again, here he wants to be as clean as possible, but there's the element of dirtiness in these things that always happen. There's always something that goes wrong in this scene. It's Waingro. And the sound editing stuff is really brilliant. It's really, really incredibly tense, and watching all these components thrown together, and you get the sense, like you were saying, of the pre-structured, the planning, the notion that they know exactly what they're going to do. And then one element goes wrong, but this time it's one of the heist team themselves that goes wrong. And I just think it's fantastic, this opening scene.
So, my number one, we already know what it is. It's 2001 Ocean 11 remake by Steven Soderbergh. Very distinct from the 1960s Rat Pack flick of the same name.
Which you described to me as a little bit worse and also more racist.
My favourite scene is actually pretty linked to yours, in that it involves the amazing Yen and his acrobatics. But my favourite scene is the actual... So we've seen loads of sequences. We've seen all the... about 45 minutes total of assembling this huge team of criminal geniuses. You've seen George Clooney just come out of prison in that brilliant sequence, which is only cut where there's only one cut the entire time George Clooney's character Danny Ocean is being interrogated about whether he's going to be a criminal, what he's thought about in the future, in the past, in prison. It just cuts to a close-up of his, just like the top half of his face. Just complete control of that sequence. You've had all of this. You've seen so many things pulled off with just impossible perfection, and you get inside the vault of the Bellagio Casino and Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
You then see Shabo Quinn playing the amazing Yen.
Yeah.
You see him. You've already seen him snuck in into this center of this vault, hold with inside one of these like money trolleys that they use to push around money in casinos in this high stakes holding vault. You see the lid. Yeah. You cut to a close up of the lid of this one that he's hiding in, holding his breath, and you see him push up on the lid. And there's a briefcase on top.
Yeah.
And you push it, and it cuts to there's a switch cut around to the side, and the briefcase slides off, and it hangs in midair as it cuts back to him having caught it.
I watched this film for the first time this last week, and oh my god, when I noticed, because I really like the scene, that I noticed there's a briefcase on top of it, and I was sitting there just staring. I was like, oh, and then one of the people who hacked into the video cameras noticed it. He goes, oh, we got a problem, and then he gets distracted by someone else, and so I'm like, they've all forgotten there's a briefcase on there, and I was really stressed. It caused me such visceral anxiety.
Yeah, and it goes back to, because you've seen so many things happen brilliantly, and then just before this sequence you've had a near miss with the laser grid system in the elevator shaft as Linus, played by a young Matt Damon, and Danny Ocean descending on these tiny little rope pulley things. They've just missed breaching the alarm grid in this elevator shaft, and then their ropes turn out to be slightly shorter than they need to, so they drop to the bottom of the shaft with a bit of thud, and they have to wait a little bit longer to knock out the two guards external of the vault itself. So you've seen so many things play out perfectly, and then you've seen a couple of things go wrong, so you're like, oh, well, we're going to return to this. Everything's going perfectly again, and it's going super slick. And just the shot where the briefcase hangs in midair as it looks like it's just going to crash to the ground.
Yeah.
Which is, I get it, it's a direct callback to the beads of sweat in Mission Impossible, where it's just like that sudden catch is just so slick and so cool. And then you watch this just amazing, talented actor and performer whip across and doing like flips and tricks around this room, which you've seen is full of this like square grid of lasers around everything that's part of this vault. As he hops over and starts planting breaching charges on the wall, and then
he gets his hand stuck. His bandage on his hand that was he was injured earlier in the
stuck in the door,
next to a breaching charge.
Do not blow the door. Linus, can you read me?
10, 9, 3.
Maybe the pinch blew out his earwig. Linus, can you read me? Do not blow the door.
2, 1. Something.
Well, did you check the batteries?
No. You lose focus in this game for 1 second. I know. Somebody gets hurt. I hear Yen complaining.
it's another one of those moments, like I said, with your pick from Ocean's 11. It captures
the ethos of the film, right?
Yeah, it's both high stakes, really cool, really well thought out and complicated crime, meshed perfectly well with this irreverent sense of comedy that lands exactly when it needs to.
There's this sort of narrative theory storytelling thing. There's this sort of trope of it, which, like, in your story, you get in your sort of average length story, you get one really stupid coincidence that you're allowed to use without breaking sort of immersion of the audience. And in this one, it's just that the batteries run out on the thing. Just this, and it's absolutely fantastic happenstance in this really kind of over the top, almost jokey film at various points, which is heavily contrasted, of course, with my number one pick, which is Steve McQueen's 2018 offering of Widows, which is you and me both went to watch this film together in the cinema in Newcastle. We came out both like having cried a bit, and both like we both had this sense of like we'd watched a film that was incredible. And
I just can't believe I haven't seen or heard nearly as much about Steve McQueen's Widows as it's an excellent film.
And there's so much I could draw out about this film, and but I've chosen the heist scene in this because you talked about earlier how the stakes are really heavily established in Nolan's Inception, with the really careful and meticulous building of the law and practicing and showing in practice how different time zones are affected in different layers of the dreams. And so you really invest in the stakes of that because these really complex systems have been explained really mechanically well to you. It's broken down really interestingly. The reason this scene has stakes that work is because of powerhouse performances by Viola Davis and the rest of the lead female cast, and you're there for the pure emotional stakes, the pure emotionality of what's going on.
Put the fucking hands on me. Don't even think about it. Check his gun, check his gun.
The person they are robbing is someone who is the current ward of the state whose son is trying to run for office, and he's a horrible old racist, as we find out in the film, and it's almost a lot to say about race relations and how they impact very local politics to different bits and wards of cities.
Because it's not even a senator; it's the 18th ward of a particular city.
So it's all about the city it's in, and how the most local kind of politics has this really powerful pull, and like there's this political conflict that drives so much of the events of the film. Daniel Kaluuya being one of the agents of that, who is pursuing, who gives one of the best villainous performances I've ever seen in this film. And so he's there as this rogue thing that you know is homing in on what's going on, and it builds and builds and builds. The actual heist scene itself is they've shown how they do it in practice. They've cultivated all these different skills from it, as you would in a normal heist film, but it's shot much more seriously, and there's real emotional stakes playing here. And then the scene plays out, and in order to disguise their voices, they have these child's toys that change their voice, make it deeper, and sort of like almost like a Transformers toy, whatever it is. And they have these on, and the practical effect that has is that their breathing is amplified 100-fold, and so the pacing doesn't really come from like extra diegetic music necessarily. It's from these ragged, anxious, panicked, irregular breaths that give this really off-kilter beat to the scene through the audio, and then the old racist ward of the state finds them, and he pulls a gun on them. And he shoots one of them, and then is killed by one of the widows as they were going to do this heist. They get in there, they unpack everything, and the heist goes at a plan. Except, as we talked about in Heat, it's gone wrong because now it isn't they're not stolen some money. They've murdered someone. They've murdered a very important, very powerful, rich white man. And it's so incredibly tense due to this pulling back of the music and soundtrack, and this really short, ragged breaths and this practical effect that just are an incredible way to build tension in your scene. And I just love, and it's Viola Davis on top form. And then they get out and they get into the car and they say drive, and then the driver's head is pushed back by a gun held by by the grinning Daniel Kaluuya, and his menace in that, and when he sort of realizes he's won the scene, the whole thing plays out brilliantly. This incredible tension is built, and it's because of the emotional stakes the film takes so much time to establish. McQueen here allows this film to get you so deeply emotionally invested with some career best performances and general storytelling notes. It's just so perfectly managed, and that's it, as a denouement of the film, it's perfect, and it's the perfect heist scene.
I think it bounces so well off the initial opening sequence of the film, which is their four husbands carrying out their own heist, and it going so badly wrong that's full of violence, and it ultimately ends in their presumed all of their deaths.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoilers for Widows,
dead,
I guess.
Yeah.
All presumed dead. One of them's not. He's the architect.
Turned
of the
back
villain.
on its head by this.
Yeah, but that sequence being so frenetic and action laden, it's set up like almost like a sort of Heat archetype. It's full of career criminals and big.
Yeah.
It's got a massive police SWAT presence, and it ends in this ultimate like fireball explosion of the van front flipping, and then you smash cut to Viola Davis in this white bed, and then it pans backwards. Sorry, to
in the opening scene,
in the opening scene, the actual opening scene of the film, just after you've seen sort of Widows, the title, you see Viola Davis and an empty space next to her in her bed, and at that point, you've seen heist movie. You're like, oh, this was sold to me as a heist movie and all the material, and from that point until the actual heist plays out, you're watching a trauma film. You're watching a trauma film that invests you so much.
So if you have this momentary edit where you have the fireball and then cuts to Viola Davis in a blank bed, and that scene's intercut with sort of daily routines of all the different wives and husbands and stuff, and then you see in this final scene, you see the heist scene play out, and the structural edit is the next place that Viola Davis goes to is where her husband is revealed to not be dead, Liam Neeson, and he's there, and they have this final showdown. And so it's juxtaposed where you have her without him as the shot you see after the heist going wrong. The heist succeeds, and then you realise the spanner in the works is Liam Neeson, who's lied and been revealed halfway through the film to actually been alive all along. It cuts to her and him rather than her without him.
Yeah.
And the reason that works so brilliantly is, to quote the esteemed director of Star Wars Attack of the Clones, is it's like poetry. It rhymes. and that's the end of our podcast this week.
I'm so disarmed by that quote that I just can't,
well, it's
can't
true.
do anything else.
For all like the notion of rhyme in filmmaking, it works.
It does. It does.
When you mirror shots you've done, it builds effect, even subconsciously. So yeah, that is why I think Widows. So your choice is Ocean's 11 for its top heist scene. Mine is Widows for its final denouement. And that brings us to the end of today's episode.
Bingo.
As always, he's been Martin.
He's also been Martin.
And that's been Movies and Martins this week. We'll see you again next week for our Sometimes Weekly podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. That was great, man. As always, you can find Martin Shaw on cinematography.wordpress.com and me on The Haven, an actual play 5th edition D&D podcast. You'll find Movies and Martins on all good podcast platforms and YouTube. Please leave us a like, review, share, suggest us to a friend, whatever you want. All our links are in the descriptions below. Thank you very much for listening. See you next week. As always, I've been Martin. No, sorry, that's not how it works.
Oh.
As always, he's been Martin.
He's also been Martin.
I can't believe I messed that up and I said as always.
We've done this for we've done this for like 2 years as well. It's not even like this is just a podcast thing.
It's great. Sorry. Okay, so